Good evening to all. This is TomPadulaTV and Tom Padula on world history tonight from 7:30 till 8:30. Dedicate 1 hour, but in this 1 hour tonight, and I want to welcome everyone who comes on both tonight and during the week to listen to what I have to say and developing your taste for history over millennia. Now, we've done the initial big part where we don't have much information about history in general, you know, the early part, millions of years ago and hundreds of thousands. And then we've come to the 10,000 mark. That's 10,000 years from, from now, before us. And we discussed the development of early men and the discoveries he made, fire, tools, Stone Age in villages and agriculture, husbandry. And we then said that civilization, the word civilization means citizen life. In other words, from villages to proper city. And the early men were interested in making life easy for themselves by inventing good things for themselves. One of them was village life, made it much easier than hunting for food, etc. And but there was a problem as well. You need to have fertile land. So that's where we are today. And I also want to introduce tonight more about the Indigenous people of Australia. We talk about the invasion, etc. What does it really mean, and what effect did, the settlement of people from Europe in Australia cause to the Indigenous people here? But what happened here has happened in Europe, and it's happened in China, in everywhere you've gone, as men and women have moved around the world. They've had similar developments, but it wasn't the development in the same way. So now we're going to go into the details as we go on. Particular civilizations. I can't do it all in one go. I'll do it a bit here, a bit there. So it's going to be interesting, and you can do some of the work as well by looking up things that I'm suggesting and whatever interests you. Tonight we're going to look at the early cities, the ones that were formed between rivers where there was fertile land. So, we'll go through it and we'll see what happens. And then I'll go to the Aborigines, early life. And also tonight I have a guest speaker as well. Interviews. I thought about the songs, Italian songs. Now, I'm doing Italian songs as well, but I will repeat 2 of them tonight because I want those 2 I'm going to use then for my class, Italian class, on Tuesdays between 11:25, again, the same sort of format, to 12:30. So the first 5 minutes, I introduce the hour and then I go on. And I also talk about, my other hour on Sunday, on Dante Alighieri, Italian literature. It's more of a literary type of hour, and doing the Inferno of Dante Alighieri is quite a challenge. There's 100 cantos, and I will be doing canto number 9 on Sunday. So that's where we are at the moment. I think my work is developing nicely, and tonight's interview is a new one. As you can see, you don't have to stay put in whatever you decide. You can change your mind, or you can improve it as you go along. So that's where we are. It's 7:29. We're almost there. Thank you very much to all my supporters. It's fantastic to have a few people online looking at what I do. But don't forget, I have Insegna.com. I'm a bookseller and a teacher, and I do a lot of other things as well. So these are the things that interest me, and I would like you to join in. it's education with a bit of a bit of fun maybe, but really a lot of it is educational based. And I have no regrets about that. That's what I do, and that's it. So let's start now. In the book that I have in front of me, and my other books around, and what I find out during the week. For example, during the week, I found out that the Earth suffered a big little star, a meteorite, hit Earth millions of years ago, and that's when the sun was. The Earth became really dark, and that's how the Ice Age came about. Anyway, that was an added on for me. That was good that I learned that. I didn't know about that, or if I had known, I had forgotten. So here we go. Now, we were talking about some of the important development in human life, in humans. We're going to do. First, we're going to look at the rich river valleys of the Nile in Egypt, the Tigris, Euphrates, and the Indus, the cradles of civilization. These are the three areas that most of the textbooks that I've worked from, both in Italy and here, there hasn't been much said about the China or South America, or indeed the northern part of Europe, or these are all added-ons. So we're going to look at these eventually, slowly but surely, in order to bring in the world history. World history can only be brought in by tackling what happens in other, in our other nations. And we've got 210 nations. They're about 220. I don't know the exact number. Each one of them has got a history. And within each one, there's a lot of history as well. So it's a big topic, history. You can choose whatever you want to do. But tonight, this is what happens in Neolithic villages in the three great rivers valleys of the Middle East: the Nile Valley, the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, and the Indus Valley. Now, there have been excavations that have shown that these civilizations really, made a big impact in terms of the way we know civilization today, and it's important. The other one, in the valley of the Huanghe in China, there's much. I will come back to that as well. We cannot yet be certain where it began, first of all, but as we have most information about Egypt, we shall consider that country first. So in this particular textbook, there is the mention is that, what do we do first? Which one do we find out? Because, let's face it, archaeologists have unearthed a lot of information about these places, and and also, for example, in the Euphrates Tigris Valley, they developed the writing, the Cuneiform writing. So writing, in the early days was just to convey simple messages between rulers, etc. The development of the alphabet was a slow process as well. Now, the rocky cliff walls of the valleys are in most places hundreds of feet high and extremely steep. But of course they are not perfectly straight and parallel. We're talking about the rivers here. The rivers, the Nile, the Euphrates, Tigris. So you get a huge water going through particular dry lands in a way until they get to the sea. So they start in the mountains generally, and the rivers go towards the sea. And they all end up there. So there's a lot of fertile land brought down by the rivers. Now, another thing that really was important that came through from Neolithic villages was the taming of cattle and the domestication of animals. The taming of the cattle was important because it provided good food. Now, the cattle was a free animal as well until the villagers decided, sort of caught caught a few of them and sort of put them together in one spot and put a tree trunk around them. They worked out that instead of hunting them, they could grow them there and eat the meat whenever they wanted it. So that's, that was an important development as well. So that's as far as meat is concerned. But in the Nile Valley, agriculture had a bit of a boost with this sort of method. It's called the invention of the shadoof, Shadoof. After they had begun life in farming villages, the barbarian Egyptians, I don't like the word barbarian, I'd like to say the older Egyptians, quickly improved on the natural advantages of their land. By about 5000 before Christ, they had invented the shadoof, a kind of primitive crane for raising water from the river to irrigate the crops. At about the same time was made the first plough on earth. So the plough and the shadoof, so raising of the water. So in summertime you need more water, and you've got your crops, and there you go. You can build. Well, you can produce more food, and because you're producing more food, you got more free time, especially if you then put aside. And as the number of people grows, of course, that's where the civilization, what we call civilization. We call that civilization, but, if you think about it, if you're a happy person in a Neolithic village and you have a good time, well, that's pretty good. It's good living in a Neolithic village. In a lot of the Neolithic villages where it was easy, where food was gathered well, and they built their own huts and houses, the huts initially, and then they improved on these things here. And really, the Neolithic village still exists today in a lot of the areas of the world. They're called paesi in Italian, country towns. That's what they are, country towns. Now, with modernisation, of course, you've got communications, road networks, etc. But if you are, on a mountain side, very hard to get up there, and therefore you're more isolated. Therefore, you can live a happy life there, provided you're happy. So, what is civilization? When we call civilization, we call having all the modern cons that we have, and we might not be as happy because we're always greedy. We always want more. We want more of everything. I've got a small house, I need a bigger one. I've got a small car, I need a bigger car. I've gone to a couple of places here around the place. I want to go overseas. These are, it's a natural for us to want to do better for ourselves. Now, let's not forget, when I say civilization, I'm talking about the latest development in particular societies around the world. And in Egypt is the big one. Egypt is the big one, really, because you can actually go to Egypt now. I've had my family members go in there, very impressed with the pyramids, etc. All these things didn't just happen. They were built over thousands of years, and with governments that were pretty harsh and, with a lot of wars that were fought, and other people subjugated and made into slaves and made to work. So that's, we don't come from our civilization. A lot of it is built because of wars. Peacetime comes after periods of wars. When they realize, I've had enough of this fighting, let's have some peace now. Then we've got a lot of peace, said, let's have some wars. Still going on. Okay, the first plough. You remember that Paleolithic man used a simple digging stick to grub out wild roots for food. Neolithic farmers transformed this instrument into a wooden hoe. Then someone thought of lengthening the handle of the hoe so that it could be attached to the yoke of a pair of oxen. Now there you are, plough. And the cattle that have been tamed, the ox. An animal for work. You use that animal in work. The final step was the addition of a new pair of handles for the ploughman's use. So the plough saves a lot of work. You can imagine, if you've got to dig up one line, all at once you can cut a lot of times with that. Okay, I need a bit of water, sorry. This invention, the plough, more than doubled the amount of land that could be cultivated by a single workman in a given time. It also did the work very much more effectively, and greatly increased yields of grain were obtained. So that's what happened in Egypt. Some of the surplus grain was stored and used as we use coined money today. So you give me this, I'll give you some grain. You provide service to me, and that's happened in these places. Basically, we're talking about the Nile, the Euphrates, Tigris-Euphrates delta, if you like, valley, and the Indus Valley. I haven't visited any of them. So if you're brave, go one day and have a look. And so a lot of people love travelling, but travelling is a nomadic life in a way. You stop doing what you're doing and you go and have a look. And in some of these places, a lot of the civilization was then. Some of the remnants are still there. Okay. So the wealth in grain that was stored was used to exchange products, services, whatever. Cattle was also used as money, perhaps even more than grain was. So animals were exchanged. In some parts of Africa, even today's men's wealth is counted in cattle. Now we're talking about, these are sort of old textbooks. So the old textbooks have got a lot of ingrained prejudices in them. It can't be helped because we've made such progress in the last 70 years. It's incredible. So if you're looking at, the older textbooks, there's a lot of good information, but you have to sort of look at it and revise it. The prejudices are ingrained in the explanations. So this is a problem, but not a problem at all. For me, I love it. I don't mind. I've got an open mind about these things, so it's easier. But if you want to be really precise, well, then you can really object to the way things are written, and can be helped. Now, one of the early inventions by these agricultural people in the Nile Valley was, let's not forget, these are not Neolithic villages anymore, they are permanent fixtures. They've got enough fertile land year in, year out, they can grow the same crops. So if you can grow the same crops, and each year, you've got the seasons. You've got to count the days. You've got to count the moon disappears and comes on. So you look to the sky for some answers. So one of the first early inventions was the first calendar. The first calendar in Egypt, this place says it was in 4,326 BC, before Christ. Now, I don't know. I'm assuming, so it's about 5,000 years ago, 4,500 years ago, plus the first calendar. Now, the first calendar, they counted the days. They came up with 365 days. Even then, they didn't have the quarter. Every 4 years, you change, you add one day. That came later. And also the months, as I said, during Roman times, the months were only 10 instead of 12. So one of the other achievements of the Neolithic Egyptian farmers must be noted, the invention of the calendar. The weather and the seasons are very important to farmers anywhere in any age, even today. But an accurate calendar was more important to Egyptian farmers than to most others because of the extreme regularity of the annual flooding of the Nile. Extreme regularity of the flooding of the Nile. You knew when it started and you knew where it finished. Only if they were prepared for it in advance could they properly make ready the fields, the irrigation ditches and the shadoufs for the inundation. So when you didn't have water, you had the shadouf that could pick up the water from the river and be used for irrigation. So that's the first irrigation. Look, thank you very much. So many people coming on tonight, so the word must be spreading. I've got here in front of me Dino, Zoran, Nina, Rob. Thank you very much for watching. I will go on with this. The Egyptian calendar had a year of 365 days, though it did not allow for the extra day in leap year. Doesn't matter, one day. At last we can tell exactly when this invention took place. Modern astronomers have calculated that the Egyptians began using their calendar in 4326 BC. So some astronomers, who are they? So this guy here says most astronomers. There you are. So you have to be critical when you're reading history books. There are many ways you can look at it. These inventions helped to change the way in which men lived together. So once you have the calendar, you have your field, you have your water, you have your seeds, you can grow crops. Civilization moves very fast. And when you grow too much of anything, we've got that problem right now in Australia. You need labour. Labour. So in other words, you're going to fight wars in order to get the slaves. Well, let's see what happens. In a really primitive hunting tribe, men and women are ruled by custom. They don't fight that much. That's the way we do it. There is usually no chief or king. Here we go. Some persons are naturally recognised as people of more experience and wisdom than others. You know, somebody knows we have a lifespan. Used to be very short once upon a time, especially when they were fighting. Now we've extended it because we keep each other alive a lot more with our medicines. So think about, you know, what the doctors and the pharmaceutical companies are doing. They're extending life in a way. So think about that. Some persons are naturally recognised, just as you recognise some boys or girls in your class. So in other words, if you've been a teacher, you were in business, you know the one who's a bit smarter than the other. I don't like that either, because then what happens is that person there is brought forward and the others are like more equality. But, you know, being nice, it's not necessarily being a good leader. You're a good survivor, but, you know, the leaders generally are tougher individuals, the ones who want to control. Well, but then the people you teach will behave that way too. That's a problem. So you've got to balance things off. Okay. Now, war leaders become kings. So what happens here in the Nile Valley, you've got plenty of everything. You then need to expand, you know, your workforce. So in a food-producing tribe, however, the king or war chief has become a very important person. The tribe and its neighbours have much property worth protecting or worth stealing, according to the point of view, as we saw in the last, it is the duty of the king, who is usually the richest person in a barbarian tribe, in a tribe, to lead in war to protect the tribe's wealth or to gain more of it. Well, yes, again, we're looking at it from a property point of view. I look at it more from a society's needs point of view. Because when you fight a war too, if you notice, whenever you fight with somebody, after the fight is over and time has passed, you actually become best of friends. So when you become best of friends, what happens? There is exchange of, you know, can marry my daughter. And then that's how civilization grows. And and it moves on with new inventions as well. But if you don't like the chief anymore, there is internal wars as well. That happens in the animal world. It happens amongst humans as well. Now, the kingdoms of Upper and Lower Egypt. The plough, the shaduf and the calendar increased wealth still further in the Nile Valley. Neighbouring villages made alliances for mutual protection, and successful war chiefs attracted more and more villages to their banners. In this way, they grew up in the fifth millennium. So we're talking about still around the 4,000 years before the birth of Christ. The two kingdoms of Upper and Lower Egypt. So you got the two kingdoms, Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt. The kings of hundreds of villages is much more important than the king or chief of one village, of course. In fact, he was thought of by his subjects and probably thought of himself as a god. There we are. Religion comes in. Is it the spirit? No. It's a human being who's been set aside and generally protected by others in order for that person to yield power. Now, when you yield power, you need to make laws that are just and fair or unfair. You make laws. In order for you to send your message across, what do you need? You need writing. And that's where the alphabet comes in. To send a simple message from the ruler to the rest of the population. So you need to remember that in history, progress is slow, but it's steady. And every time you go backwards, you also go forward. Every time there's a conflict, there is also the opportunity for peace. Every time there's a tragedy or renewal, it keeps going. Now, once you realise that the king of one village is still, you see him every day, but you don't see the one who controls 20 villages. You don't see that person. You haven't got access to that person. We don't have access easily to our Prime Minister, although they move around these days. But in a big country, you can't, they've opened up because of modern developments in government. But a lot of the kings, the old kings and the old rulers, they understood that they didn't want to be seen by everybody in order for them to hold more power. And that's very true throughout history. So you need government, beginning of government. But divine or not, he obviously had to have some way of keeping records, collecting taxes. You still need the roads, you know what I mean? He developed these things, organising the complicated irrigation system, and so on. He could not possibly see all this himself, as the chief of an early Neolithic village had done. The difference between a captain of a ship and the admiral. The admiral's got 20 sheep, 50, hundreds. The captain only looks after one. It's like families. One of the jokes about Italy was, the Italians haven't got 60 million people, they've got 12 million families. But that's true also of all other countries. If you develop a strong family connection, then if that family is held very strong, you almost have one voice within it. Although we've discouraged that in modern times, to say, you individual develop everything. You have to develop yourself, and so that you can free up the pater familias, the responsibility of the person who getting older and has to look after you. So that's where we're at. Let me have another drink. Okay. So that's where, now, governments, this is where writing comes in. Governments need writing. And some of his government officials needed to be able to read and write in order to keep records and work out sums to find out how much tax a farmer owed, or how much water he might take in a day from the irrigation canal. You've got to keep the infrastructure going. You need the officials to check up on people. You need controls. And the stronger the controls, the more power and the more influence you have. So when we blame somebody in power that they expect control, that's the idea. And if you don't like it all that much, well, in our modern times, you can wait for the next election. But really, once you've elected that person, that person runs the way they want to do with their officials. Leaders are not on their own. They're always in groups. They are the front pieces. But, there are a lot of other people around, and people depend on real knowledge in order to make good decisions. Governments need writing, and some of his government officials needed to be able to read and write in order to keep records, etc., etc. So writing too was invented in Egypt in the 5th and 4th millenniums BC. Now, that is not quite true. Well, that is true for Egypt, but it's also true in the Euphrates, Tigris rivers. They also developed writing called Cuneiform writing, and I've got to look up in China what happened, because they developed there too. The indigenous Australians never did that. For example, in the South American, the Maya, the Aztecs, I only found it lately, that never developed the will. The will. Everything was done on the back because of them. So there are certain areas of the world where certain things did not develop. Well, they all, the painting, that's natural, but you can't send a message on a rock. You've got to have the physicality of transfer. Some people have used pigeons, but you need to have the little paper in the paw. So think about, if you want to really progress in whatever you do, you need to keep records. How much, I always say, what do you know? Do you remember what you ate on Friday, last Friday? You don't, unless you write it down. So keeping records of what you do and how you do it, and etc., is a very important activity. Boring as it might seem, but it's not important. Well, it's important for others. Once you go on, they can read up, but really no one is going to bother. Not these days. Millions of videos, and the internet is full of this. If any person thinks they're important and they are afraid of privacy settings, yes and no. Yes, you're only if you're important, or if you do the wrong thing, or that's when people come after you. But they might dislike you. But really, honestly, most people are just people living their life in the world, and it's wise for people who want to live a good life, because it's the best life you can have, rather than fighting all the time. Have a drink. Rather have a war. Get the leaders to go and play golf together. I really believe in that. People, thinking about climate change. China hasn't gone to the climate change. Well, they should have been there. They're not there. Why not? You should be there. So ask the president there to go and play golf. Will he come? That's the idea. But what I'm saying is that's the peace is achieved that way with good diplomacy. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to gain more land. You want to grab it from other people. The old idea of stealing. I take what I need because I'm stronger. Well, now there's still a lot of that, but this is the 3rd millennium. Can we do better? That's the question. And history will teach us, will give us a clue of how to behave. Because without, a lot of people say to me today, live day by day. Sure, you live day by day. But if you don't plan, If you don't plan, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So in other words, you need that. You can enjoy it today, but whilst you're doing all this, you can do other things as well. I could just stay home and have a drink, sleep in front of the TV. I want to do things. But why? I don't know. Just happy to do it. But it does require some discipline. Before I actually started, 8 o'clock, my God, I haven't, that's where I've gone. Anyway, let me finish off because I've got to go to the next bit. So writing too was invented in Egypt in the 5th and 4th millenniums BC. In China and elsewhere, as in Egypt the need for it arose, different forms of writing were invented. So this textbook also mentioned China and the Euphrates, Tigris area, the Sumerians, Sumer, Persia. Everywhere the invention of writing followed the same steps, though in China and some other countries, the artist remained stuck on the first step of 3. I don't know what he says about this. In other words, you're not using the Roman. Well, why do you have to use it? I mean, I've got 20 languages in Insegna, and sometimes I look at Hindi writing and some of the other writings. They communicate. I don't understand, but they all have an alphabet of some sort. It's all the idea that one symbol means this, and it continues to mean that. We can talk about that later, but let me finish. I'm going to finish there. I'm going to finish there for today, and I hope that you enjoy the way I do history, because it's not the usual thing. I digress. I give a lot of other. I got to a lot of other places, a lot of personal considerations in this. Therefore, some of my considerations may not be, accepted. But it doesn't matter. We can always change. Just take from what I say whatever you want. Whatever you think you don't want, or I'm not going there the right way that you would like me to, then you go and do it yourself. And that's the idea. And if you want to contact me, write me an email, TomPadulaTV@gmail.com or Insegna@bigpond.com. I don't mind receiving a few people, a few comments about my work. At the beginning I thought, no, I'm not going to do that, that people open up. Now I realise that just a few people are coming on, and basically the people who know me, but I'm sure who's going to last an hour of one guy talking? Come on. But you can always do it in 3 or 4 steps, You do half an hour today, then you can do another 10 minutes tomorrow. If you got to Tom Padula, Tom Padula on Facebook, you do that straight away. On insegna.com, it'll be on the blog. Let me get my Australiana now. We're going to go to Australia now. But before that, I need to have a bit of a drink too. Some nights I need it more than others. Let me get something else. Okay. Now, we're talking about the indigenous people, the Aborigines. Okay, before the invasion. Don't forget, the invasion still continues now, and people did visit Australia, but they did not settle down. So the invasions only occur when you settle down in a place and you want a piece of the action. So let me have a look here. The land and the people. So along the eastern, let's have a look. Should I do it from the beginning? Yeah, I'll do that from the beginning. The continent, which is now called Australia, extends from the tropics, the Torres Strait Islands of Cape York, almost halfway to the South Pole, the tip of Tasmania. Big land. This means enormous differences in climate, weather, and these differences must affect the style of life of any people who live in Australia. We know that. Some of us migrate to Queensland for a few months of the year. Across the north of the continent, and especially near the coast, the top end, as it is often called, the northwest, monsoon wind blows between December and April. The monsoon brings with it very heavy rain, up to 3 or 4 metres in some places. The land becomes flooded, the creeks and rivers flow in torrents, and travelling is difficult or impossible, but for the rest of the year, very little rain falls. Now, these books here have been written 30, 40 years ago, and they're still the same. The monsoon still comes. Nothing has changed, except maybe some more water further down the south. And, we've got climate change, so you've got to study the situation there. But we still get a lot of flooding up north. It comes along. Now, along the eastern coast of Queensland, some of the most fertile land has long been occupied by white people. This guy, white people, by people other than Indigenous people. I don't like the term white people because a lot of the people who worked in Queensland came from the Pacific Islands in the early days. And they weren't so in other words, a lot of this history needs to be sort of looked at properly. Let's call people where they come from. It's not the invasion is not just by white people. Everyone has invaded. They now grow sugarcane, bananas, pineapples, and other tropical fruit there. So it's true, and we eat them and we buy them. Coles, etc. That's where I go, and I used to go to the other place. And now, in other words, we're really producing a lot of food now. Think about it, some people were starved, did not eat in 1900, in the 19th century. And we only had 2 billion people on Earth by the year 1900. So in other words, 1901, we had about 2.3 billion people in Australia. Now, we are 8 billion, and most people eat. In fact, I was mentioned something about food, and my neighbour, my visitor today, thanks, Joe, he said, but everybody eats in Australia now. Everybody. Because even if you don't have money, people give you food. There's more food thrown away than actually eaten. There's a lot more. There's plenty there. Now, further north in Queensland on the Cape York Peninsula, in Arnhem Land, in the Northern Territory, and in the Kimberley district of Western Australia, many Aborigines, many Indigenous people live who keep much of their old way of life. They are more isolated. They used to be. I was talking about 40 years ago here. Things have changed, they're starting to change now with the new technologies and education, all the progress that's been made since 1967. It's taken a while, a lot of fighting, etc. But now the contributions are coming through. More Indigenous people in all walks of life are doing quite well, but there's still a lot more to do. There's always a lot more to do. Now forget, we are never happy with what we've got. If you're happy, you are blessed. Aborigines who keep much of their old way. From them, we can learn many details of how it was before the invasion. And it wasn't Captain Cook. It was Captain Arthur Phillip when he came with his ships. Because Captain Cook came and went. He did not stay. So let's get this right. And it's true. An invasion occurs when you settle down. We can see how these people live today and talk to old people. The centre of Australia is quite different. So we're talking about the centre. It is very dry. In some years there will be no rain at all. And in other years there may be floods. So people cannot grow crops in the usual way. Yes, they can. But anyway, you've got to keep that into consideration, this sort of reality. Often non-Aboriginal people call the centre of Australia the dead heart. So we know the dead heart. Well, it's not dead at all. It's quite alive, even if it's a desert. But it was not all for the people who lived there before before other invaders arrived. Those people there had lived there for a long time. Not many of them, small populations. They knew how to find food and water. Their ancestors lived for thousands of years in areas where explorers, non-Indigenous explorers, died. People have turned some parts of it into sheep and cattle stations. Again, non-Indigenous people turned them into cattle stations. Before they came, it was much more interesting, with more trees, shrubs, grasses than there are now. And that was 40, 50 years ago. In some parts too, minerals that are valuable to non-Indigenous people, but they are valuable to Indigenous people too, but let it not be coal, carbon, that's out, going out, have found that here the original landscape had been much altered by mining. So mining does damage the natural environment. You dig, well, all that, you get the wealth. It's like selling your family silver. Once you've sold it, it's not gone. So the same thing with this. Once you mine your natural shrubs, it's gone forever. It takes, how many thousands of years can it take? 1,000 years before they return to the normal, and it'll be just a valley like a hill, etc. It's going to take a while. But there are only a small number of non-Indigenous people living in those areas. So the miners of the 1960s and 70s in Western Australia, the great magnate, I don't want to mention his name. He was like a king, the amount of money made from mining is unbelievable, and just for a few people, because then you put machinery, but there is an effect on the land, and the people who used to live there, who looked after it, well, they didn't do anything to the land. They just roamed around. They're nomadic, Paleolithic people. They weren't even Neolithic. They lived like in Paleolithic times. So looking for food every day. You can't make, civilization. That is a civilization in itself, if that's what you want. If you choose, well, they didn't choose necessarily. They did what had gone on before. Now, but they can teach us today the ancestors, how the ancestors survived and enjoyed life in particular environment. Well, enjoyed life. They did. We don't know. I didn't write down. I'm happy today. So we're assuming these things. Again, the writer here has to express himself in the way that he knows, and he does it. And he helps me today because, and that's what I'm encouraging you to do. I'm encouraging you to look at your books, or history books that you studied from, or going to a library, or, again, use modern technology. Google historian, look up all these things. Have a good read. It's important. Now, I'm coming to the end of this, and I'm going to stop there, because I think I've said enough. But what I want to do now, I want to introduce my, let me see, oh gosh, my guest speaker. My guest speaker, let me see, sorry, I might have to come on. Yeah, I thought so. Here we go. Yes, I got it. Now, I have to do this, hold it, that's it. And I'm going to, I'll mention his name. He wrote in 2009, here, this guy here was in government and in opposition as well. His name is Thompson, ex-member for Wills. And, he came yesterday it was. I thought, let's do something. And we did. So here we go. Oh, sorry. I'll go back again. Because my mouse here is not doing what I want him to do. Come on, mouse. Come on. Let me do it. Unbelievable. I don't believe this. I don't believe this, that this is not happening. Come on. Oh, wow. There we are. Oh, gosh, unbelievable. Happiness. Welcome to TomPadulaTV, Calvin. Calvin Thompson, of course, and I have been, have been interviewing each other for a long time.
And long-time friends, Tom. It's good to catch up with you after the pandemic and so on. It's kept so many of us apart.
But you were away.
I was.
Around Australia.
Yes, I managed to get away for 3 months from the middle of May up to the Kimberleys, which is a fantastic spot.
And you said that when you came back, you wanted to discuss a few things. And I always loved talking to you because of your great knowledge and, of course, your contacts as well, ex-politician. Once a politician, always a politician.
Oh, I think that's true enough.
Like once TomPadula, always TomPadula.
Absolutely.
All right, well, we said, if I may, start, even though there's rain here, it doesn't matter. Maybe rain is, when it rains, it's good fortune.
It is.
So we're going to have good fortune for a system of education that hasn't been looked after by governments for quite a while. Mm. It's called the TAFE system. Mm. Technical and Further Education.
That's right, Tom, and it has been until recent years, I think it's been a terrific asset for Australia and Victoria that the public TAFE was the mainstay of technical education and training in Victoria and beyond. And it really did serve us very well in enabling young people to get the kind of training and skills that they needed to participate in the workforce. But I think the thing that's really troubled me is that in the course of the past 10 or 15 years, you've had the contracting out, the privatisation, the deregulation, the introduction of fees, and what's amounted to an attack on quality, which has really devastated the public TAFE system and I think is serving both young people and employers poorly.
Mm. Now, if I may say so, I experienced the demise of the learning of languages in the TAFE system in the early 90s when the economic rationalists arrived. Mm. Because we had at the time, I'm going to speak locally, at the time we had classes at Princess Hill.
Yes.
There were 1,400 students there on the Tuesdays and Wednesday nights, and also at Carberg High Evening School. And also the TAFE system embraced languages as well, the teaching of languages, and I think the state was, paying the teachers. It's not a big investment, but really education is for life. It's not just primary and secondary school. It's also for life.
Yes.
And I think, the governments would be well advised to actually take on, education from very early age to the latest and allow people to study without having to pay, if you know what I mean. It's actually it's like a free system for the skilling of everyone.
Yes. Well, I think unfortunately one of the things that happened with the introduction of the fee-based courses and the move towards private training colleges, which was done in the name of contestability, they said this would lead to higher standards and so on, is that we really got the worst of both worlds. You had a whole lot of extra taxpayers' money being thrown into the system, but it all went to the private training colleges, and the public TAFEs were devastated, and the amount of funding that they now receive, there has been some top-up.
We don't have the figures, so you probably can get the figures.
Exactly, but the amount of funding that they received through that course of the last decade dropped a lot, and I know that the Auditor General in each of the three states, Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland, expressed concern about the viability of the TAFE system because they simply weren't getting the money in to support the teaching staff and to maintain their courses, and instead you get these things like the vet fee help online courses, where there was a review of those that found that only 5% of the students completed the courses and 95% dropped out. So, you know, that was a terrible result for taxpayers and for the students.
Well, you know more about all this than me on a systemic level, but I've been thinking about the TAFE since the early 90s, yes. And the fact I was a bit sore that languages for the teaching of languages for adults were sort of set aside, saying, "Oh, yes. We have to pay. We don't need it." Because if I remember correctly, in the 80s, during the 80s, we had 20 languages there at Princess Hill Adult Evening School, and they came from a great variety of backgrounds. And in fact, the adults, whereas children got to school and met other children of other ethnic groups, yes. The adults got together and actually were talking to each other. So teachers of Japanese at the time, Arabic and Hindi, all came together, students and adults. It was fantastic it was only an hour and a half, 2 hours or 3 hours, classes, once a week. But it really did a very good job. Yes. And it was unfortunate that was that didn't receive the funds necessary, because after that at Princess Hill we went private. Emil Hamer was running it, went private with the school. But of course, without funding, you can't. But it's not a big expense for the state. When you consider what money that's been spent in this pandemic, the whole thing now looks like, why are we saving money?
well, that's true, and it's a much bigger question. But your personal experience of TAFE, I think, is really important and a really useful experience. But even in terms of money for the system, the amount of money being put into the system over the course of the last decade or two was increasing a lot. But because it was going to the private training colleges, a whole lot of that money was being wasted. And in courses that were not completed and courses that did not lead to employment or give people genuine qualifications. You had that move to competency-based training where they really throw out the importance of teachers and institutions and basically say learning can take place anytime, any place, anywhere.
Can I say private schools are small businesses? That's what they are. Yeah. Really. So yes. They're looking not just at the education factor, they also have to look at survival in terms of charging fees and also receiving some grants. But they are a small business. But education is not the money-making venture unless you're a university and then you import so many people from Asia on a large scale. Let's stop there. Let's stop there for a little while. Well, now I've got another two of these segments. Well, I can't play them now. I will play them next time. I'll play another one next time. I'll continue along those lines. But what I wanted to do now, I want to go back. On Tuesday, I have the Italian class. And what I wanted to do was picking up a couple of songs that I want to use for teaching. So let me see now, which one did I choose? I think I chose this one here. Yes, In Via dei Ciclamini. Okay. Now, This one here, it's in Via dei Ciclamini. Now, what I'm going to do with these song here is actually choose the words and use them in the class to teach the grammar. So if you can look it up and you come on Tuesday, you'll be able to improve your Italian or whatever. I'm going to sing it again. Here we go. Yes, there we go. This song is called In Via dei Ciclamini, and I love it when Orietta Berti sings it. So I'm going to try today. Here we go. In Via dei Ciclamini al 123 vendevano le bambole vestite come me. La guerra era finita, ma però ricordo che sui muri delle bambole scrivevo insieme a te. L'amore come l'edera s'attacca dove vuole, quel giorno senza dirmelo mi hai presa con un fiore. L'amore come l'edera s'attacca dove vuole, non vedo più le bambole, ma son legato a te. Erano giorni tutti per me, erano giorni tutti per te. In Via dei Ciclamini, dove abitavi tu, il muro delle bambole adesso non c'è più. Hanno messo una balena e l'ascensore va su e giù, e cambiano ogni sera le bamboline blu. L'amore come l'edera s'attacca dove vuole, quel giorno senza dirmelo mi hai presa con un fiore. L'amore come l'edera s'attacca dove vuole, non vedo più le bambole, ma son legato a te. Erano giorni tutti per me, erano giorni tutti per te. In Via dei Ciclamini l'amore si fermò, mi dissi ciao bambina, un giorno tornerò. La guerra era finita, ma però ricordo che mi dissi ciao bambina, ho amato solo a te. L'amore come l'edera s'attacca dove vuole, quel giorno senza dirmelo mi hai presa con un fiore. L'amore come l'edera s'attacca dove vuole, non vedo più le bambole, ma son legato a te. Eran giorni tutti per me, eran giorni tutti per me. Well, we're going to stop with that one. Now, the other one that I wanted to do is called Dio Cometiano. I'm going to use these ones here for the lesson, so that's why I'm doing this now. Dio Cometiano. So again, if you can get this one, go to Google and just write Dio Cometiano, that word there, and you get the words. And then on Tuesday, I'll actually refer to this as well. And here we go. This is the way it sounds. It's you can listen to it on YouTube from Gigliola Cinquetti. This song here is called Dio Cometiano, and it's a Domenico Modugno song, but Gigliola Cinquetti, they won the Sanremo Song Festival with this one, and yeah, it's a beautiful song, Dio Cometiano. So let's learn it, and you can sing it anytime you want. Here we go. This is my version of it. Nel cielo passano le nuvole che vanno verso il mare, sembrano fazzoletti bianchi che salutano il nostro amore. Dio come ti amo, non è possibile avere fra le braccia tanta felicità, baciare le tue labbra che odorano di vento, noi due innamorati come nessuno al mondo. Dio come ti amo, mi vien da piangere, in tutta la mia vita non ho provato mai un bene così caro, un bene così vero. Chi può fermare il fiume che corre verso il mare, le rondini del cielo che vanno verso il sole, chi può cambiare l'amore, l'amore mio per te. Now, I'm going to stop it there because it's almost 8:30. It is, and I just want to thank everyone who's come on with me tonight and during the week. Please pass the word on that these history lessons they're apart from lessons, they're presentations in my own special way, but they can be very useful to you and to others. So let people know. Also, I would just want to remind about the learning of Italian grammar and languages in general, and also the other hour on Sunday for Dante. On that note, thank you very much to you all. Buonanotte, ci vediamo la prossima volta, prossimo giovedì. Non vi dimenticate. Ciao, da Tom Padula.